He barked orders, ignored her identification, and escalated without reason. She wasn't expecting to be pulled over. But Officer Clint Radford didn't care who Judge Vanessa Cole was. To him, she wasn't a respected Superior Court judge. She was just another black woman behind the wheel. What didn't he know? The cameras were rolling, and what happened next would shake the system. Watch the full story and subscribe, because the fight against racism doesn't end in silence. It begins when the truth is revealed. Spoke calmly. She explained who she was. She did what they always told her to do. Be respectful, don't act rashly, don't raise your voice. But none of that mattered. He wasn't listening. He never intended to listen. She tried to calm the nerves. She used the same even tone she used to calm the chaos in the courtroom. "Officer, I'm Judge Vanessa Cole. My ID is right there. Please." But he interrupted her again, louder this time, with his hand hovering near his weapon. "Keep your hands where I can see them." And though her hands never moved, her heart did. It fell like a rock into her chest. Because she knew, no matter how many cases she'd solved, no matter how many public events she'd spoken at, no matter how many years she'd devoted to her city, at that moment, nothing could shield her from what he thought of her. She tried to reason. "I'm not resisting. I just want to know why I was stopped." But he didn't answer her. Instead, he called for backup. And within minutes, 2 more patrol cars had arrived at her neighborhood, which had been quiet and peaceful. People got out. And someone, thank God, someone started recording. But even as people looked at him, Radford didn't back down. He didn't care. He accused her of faking it. Playing the victim. Acting like she was special. And in that moment, Vanessa realized she wasn't just in danger. She was being erased, stripped down to a lie that could cost her her life if she tried too hard, said it too loudly, or moved too fast. She thought of her daughter, Ava, who had texted an hour earlier, "Be safe, Mom. The world is the same." And she had replied, "Always." But now, standing in her apartment on the gravel, with 3 cops forming a circle around her, and only her name and prayers to protect her, she didn't feel safe at all, so she tried again. Again. She pointed to her badge, visible through the window. "Please, my police ID is right there. Check it. Double check." A younger cop finally approached the car, leaned down, and confirmed. "She's right," he said. "The ID matches. The car is registered to her. Everything matches." But Radford didn't budge. "Anyone can fake a badge," he snapped. "You think you're better than everyone else because you wear a robe?" She wanted to scream. She wanted to ask him how many lies he'd told tonight just to justify this moment. But instead she stayed still, because if she didn't, he might twist it all over again. And she knew what happened to people like her when the story got twisted. She looked him in the eye. "No, officer. I don't think I'm better. I think I've earned the right to be treated like a person. That's all." But he didn't care. His face twisted in disgust. And when he muttered, "You people always think you're untouchable," the female officer next to him flinched. She turned away. Even she knew he had gone too far. The crowd across the street was bigger now. Phones were still recording. Voices were louder. Someone yelled, "She's a judge, man! We know her!" But Radford kept his hand near his holster, and Vanessa kept her hands raised, because she had watched too many videos where things ended differently. When Captain Richard Mays arrived, the silence was instant. He was respected. Quiet. The kind of man who didn't speak unless he had something to say. He looked at the scene. 3 cars, 1 woman, a neighborhood holding its breath, and asked the only question that mattered. Why? Radford tried to lie again. "She was uncooperative. Matched a suspect description. Didn't follow my commands. But the captain wasn't buying it. You didn't ask for her ID first? Radford stayed quiet. What description? Mays asked. Black female, dark vehicle, Radford finally said. Mays sighed. That's not a description. That's half the county. And just like that, the lie cracked open. But even as Radford was ordered to hand over his badge and go home on leave, Vanessa knew it wasn't over. She didn't cry. She didn't collapse. She just stood there, arms at her sides now, the wind tugging at her gown, her heels still forgotten. Later, she would tell reporters she wasn't afraid of dying, but she was afraid of being dismissed, erased, made invisible in the system she had dedicated her life to. That night, she went home. But she didn't sleep, and by morning the video had exploded online. Still, they tried to protect him. The union. The city. They called it a misunderstanding. Man, they said she had misinterpreted the situation. But she knew better. So did everyone who saw the video. And when she stood at a town hall meeting 2 weeks later, she didn't shout. She didn't blame. She just told the truth. I wasn't afraid because of a gun. I was afraid because I knew that my word, my badge, my years of service, all of it, could be ignored with one false report. Because I am a black woman. And that's what this uniform didn't protect me from. People listened. Changes began. Small at first, but real. The officer who recorded everything, Officer Medina, filed a full report backing her up. And for once, someone believed the black woman in the story. If you're still reading, if you feel something in your chest right now, don't let it fade. Share this story. Subscribe to the channel. Because Vanessa Cole didn't survive this night just for herself. She did it so the next person, your sister, your daughter, your neighbor, won't have to fight so hard just to be believed. Racism isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers in the dark. But she stood still. She stood strong. And she made sure it couldn't hide. Judge Vanessa Cole didn't sleep for 3 nights after the stop. She'd faced angry defendants, threats in her courtroom, even personal attacks from high-profile cases, but nothing prepared her for what it felt like to be treated like a suspect on the side of the road, with her credentials in plain sight and her hands raised under a halo of flashing lights. She kept replaying the moment in her mind. Radford's voice, sharp and cold, accusing her without reason, the way his fingers danced near his holster, as if he was itching for an excuse. The way she tried everything, reason, calm, identity, to escape the threat. But it didn't matter. She failed. She didn't escape. She only survived. And that truth crushed her harder than the pavement ever could. Her daughter Ava stayed with her, bringing groceries and silencing the news alerts that kept flooding Vanessa's phone. But even Ava couldn't stop the slow unraveling. Vanessa began to tremble when sirens passed. She found herself flinching when headlights flickered outside her window at night. She'd spent a lifetime believing that dignity and professionalism could shield her. Now, it all felt like a lie wrapped in protocol. And the public? They weren't all kind. Strangers online called her a race baiter in a robe, said she staged it, said she wanted attention. Comment after comment picked her apart like she was just another viral moment. But this wasn't content for her. This was trauma. Back at work, she tried to carry on as if nothing had happened. She stepped into her courtroom with her black robe, her steady voice, her careful judgments. But the stares lingered. Colleagues whispered in corners. One clerk she'd known for years wouldn't meet her eyes. And another judge, a white man, pulled her aside and said with a soft chuckle, "You're famous now, huh?" Like it was a joke. Vanessa forced a smile, but inside something cracked. No one asked how she was really doing. No one talked about the fear, the humiliation, the helplessness. They just treated it like a headline that would fade. But she couldn't forget. She couldn't breathe without feeling it in her lungs. The worst moment came a week later when she returned to her car after a late hearing and saw a note shoved into her windshield. It read, "Should have just followed orders. People like you think you're above the law." No signature, just ink and malice. She stared at it for a long time before folding it gently and placing it in her bag. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. But when she got home, she sat in the driveway for 20 minutes before walking inside. Ava noticed the blank look in her eyes and didn't ask questions. Instead, she wrapped her arms around her mother and whispered, "You don't have to carry this alone." But Vanessa felt like she did, because no one else could feel how deep it went, how it reached into her past and pulled out memories she'd locked away. Memories of being followed in stores as a teenager, of being stopped for fitting a description during college, of having to smile through microaggressions in law school. She thought she had outrun it, outworked it, outlasted it. But it was always there, waiting. And now it had found her again, in the most humiliating way. Still, she didn't stop. She showed up at town halls. She filed formal complaints. She spoke not with fire, but with clarity. Her voice, calm and steady, became a lighthouse in the storm. She didn't want revenge. She wanted accountability, change. And for people to understand that what happened to her wasn't rare. It was just recorded. The cameras had saved her. But what about those who didn't have neighbors filming? What about those who never made it home? The city responded with a statement. Empty, polished, politically safe. They called it an unfortunate encounter. Vanessa laughed bitterly when she read it. Unfortunate? No. It was violent, not with fists or bullets, but with assumptions, with a refusal to see her as human. And when Radford appeared on a conservative podcast claiming he was the victim, Vanessa felt the old rage return. "She made me look like a monster," he said. "She knew exactly what she was doing." The host nodded in agreement. "This is the world we live in now. Cops can't even do their jobs." "Sure?" She didn't respond publicly, but inside, she boiled. Because he wasn't just lying, he was weaponizing her trauma to paint himself as a martyr. She'd seen it before, in court, in politics, in everyday life. And yet it still shocked her how quickly the narrative could flip, how quickly the aggressor became the victim, and the victim became the villain. Then came the hardest blow. Her longtime friend and colleague, Judge Raymond Ellis, invited her to lunch under the pretense of checking in, but halfway through the meal, he leaned in and said, "Vanessa, maybe it's time to let it go. You made your point. We don't want to divide the bench." She stared at him, fork frozen in midair. "Let it go?" she repeated. "I was treated like a criminal on the side of the road for no reason." He shrugged. "I'm just saying, don't let this become your legacy." That night, Vanessa didn't sleep again. She sat on her porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the wind move the branches. And for the first time in years, she felt old. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. Her legacy? She wasn't worried about that. She was worried about her daughter. About every young black woman who would hear this story and know that even power, even robes, even respect couldn't protect them. But then something changed. Officer Medina, the woman on scene that night, filed a full report. It detailed everything: Radford's tone, his refusal to verify ID, his racist comments. She risked her job to tell the truth. And when Vanessa read it, she cried. Not because it made her case stronger, but because it reminded her she wasn't alone. That truth still had a place, even in systems that so often buried it. The internal affairs investigation found Radford in violation of multiple protocols. He was terminated. But that wasn't the end. The Civilian Review Board recommended civil rights charges. And for the first time in decades, a former officer faced prosecution for targeting a black public official. Vanessa attended every hearing, not as a judge, just as a citizen, a woman, a witness. And when Medina took the stand, her words were clear and strong. He said, "You people always think you're special. I wrote it down. I heard it. I'll never forget it." In that moment, the courtroom was silent, not because people didn't believe it, but because they did. Vanessa sat with Ava every night after court. They didn't talk about the case. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. But the silence felt different now. Shared. Understood. Months passed. The headlines faded. The cameras disappeared. But Vanessa kept going. She met with community groups. She worked on new training protocols. She used her story to shape reform, not for applause, but because someone had to. And then, one morning, she received a letter from a young girl named Mariah, age 13. It read, "I saw what happened to you. I'm scared to grow up, but you made me feel brave. Thank you for not giving up." Vanessa folded the letter slowly and placed it in the drawer beside her gavel. The pain didn't vanish. The scars stayed, but so did the fire. And if this story moved you, share it. Subscribe to the channel. Because Vanessa Cole didn't endure this to be remembered as a headline. She did it so that one day, no woman, no girl, no one at all would have to raise their hands and beg to be seen. The fight isn't over. But neither is she. Vanessa Cole sat in her courtroom, robe draped around her like armor, but her heart wasn't steady like it used to be. The gavel in her hand felt heavier now, not from the wood, but from the weight of everything that had come before it. The night on Highway 23, the sting of Radford's voice echoing, "You people." The burning shame of being disrespected in front of her own community, and the silence from those who should have stood beside her. Every day since then, she'd tried to carry herself with dignity, to push forward through the storm, but the cracks were showing. Her voice still held strength, but now there was pain stitched into the pauses. Her smile remained, but it trembled when she thought no one was looking. She had survived that night, but the story didn't end there. In fact, for Vanessa, it had only just begun. The courtroom was where she had always felt in control. Facts, evidence, procedure. But after Radford, even that space felt altered. Her name was no longer just associated with justice. It was now tied to controversy, to race, to what really happened that night. Some of her colleagues treated her like a hero in public, yet behind closed doors she heard the murmurs. She's making it political. She's dragging it out. She should move on. And that was the hardest part. Not the officer, not the trauma, but the betrayal from the very system she'd given her life to. The looks, the subtle avoidance, the hesitation in conversations that once flowed freely. She saw it all, felt it all. One afternoon, after a tense sentencing hearing, Vanessa closed her office door and leaned against it. Her hands shook. She had spent the last hour holding back tears that wanted to spill out like broken glass. She walked slowly to her desk, sat down, and opened a drawer, not for a file, but for a letter she had read 100 times. The one from young Mariah. "I'm scared to grow up, but you made me feel brave." She pressed it to her chest. That letter kept her going. That, and the fact that the fight wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all the girls like Mariah. About every black woman told she's too loud, too angry, too proud. It was about standing tall even when the weight was unbearable. But the weight was growing. The city had launched a review of police conduct, and Vanessa was asked to testify again. Not in a courtroom this time, but at a public oversight board meeting. When she arrived, the room was packed. Cameras, reporters, community leaders, critics. The air was tense. She took her seat at the long table in the front and looked straight ahead. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. When it was her turn to speak, the room went silent. "I come here not as a judge," she said, her voice low but steady, "but as a woman who stood on the side of the road, hands raised, heart pounding, trying to prove I belonged." She paused. That moment wasn't about a misunderstanding. It was about a mindset, one that says no matter your title, your achievements, your dignity, if your skin is black, your rights are optional. Her voice cracked, just slightly. "And I need you to understand something. I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of being forgotten." The audience didn't clap. Not because they didn't agree, but because they were stunned, frozen. Her truth hit like thunder. After the meeting, Vanessa walked alone to her car. It was dark, cold. A man in a gray hoodie stepped from the shadows and approached her quickly. Her body stiffened. Fear gripped her again. But then he stopped, hands raised. "Sorry," he said, voice soft. "Just wanted to say thank you. My sister saw your video. She's studying law now. Because of you." Vanessa let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Tell her to keep going," she whispered, "even when it's hard." But hard didn't begin to cover what came next. Radford filed a lawsuit, accusing Vanessa of defamation, career sabotage, emotional distress. It was absurd, delusional, but it was also real. And it dragged her right back into the storm. The headlines came roaring again. "Judge accused of destroying cop's career. Race, power, and retaliation. Who's right?" She had to hire legal counsel. She had to sit for interviews, answer questions like, "Did you escalate the situation? Did you play the race card?" And every time she walked into a room, she felt eyes that didn't know whether to cheer or doubt. The pain was unbearable some days. Her hands would tremble while brushing her hair. Her sleep was broken into fragments of memory. Radford yelling, porch lights blinking, Ava's panicked texts. She'd wake up gasping. She didn't tell anyone, not even Ava. Because strong women weren't supposed to fall apart. But one evening, it was too much. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror and whispered, "I'm tired." Not of fighting, but of being expected to carry everything without breaking. She leaned on the counter. "God, I'm tired," she whispered again. Then she cried. For the first time in weeks. Not tears of fear, but of release, of grief, of knowing that what she had endured, what she was still enduring, would be dismissed by many as overreaction. But she refused to let the pain win. The next morning, she showed up for the lawsuit hearing. Hair pinned back, black suit sharp, heels clicking like a metronome of defiance. Radford was there, sitting with his lawyers, wearing a smug look like he still believed he held power. But Vanessa didn't look away. She sat down, raised her chin, and waited. She wasn't a symbol. She wasn't a martyr. She was a woman who had been wronged and refused to be silenced. During the hearing, Radford's lawyers tried to twist everything. claimed she had incited public anger, intentionally destroyed his future, used the media to vilify him. Vanessa stayed calm. Her lawyer laid out the facts. The video, the testimony, the pattern. And when Officer Medina took the stand again, her voice didn't waver. "He used racial language," she said. "He refused to follow protocol. He was angry she had power he couldn't control." By the end, the judge ruled in Vanessa's favor. The lawsuit was dismissed. But the damage lingered. The whispers, the social media hate, the veiled threats, they never really stopped. Still, Vanessa stood tall. She went back to her courtroom, back to her community meetings, back to mentoring girls like Mariah. Because she knew now more than ever, this wasn't about one bad officer. It was about a system, a sickness, and if she had to carry the scars to expose it, then so be it. But she needed you. Yes, you. If you've listened this far, if your heart aches for her, if you believe in truth, in justice, in dignity that doesn't depend on skin tone or status, press the like button. Not just for Judge Vanessa Cole, but for everyone who has stood silently under flashing lights, hands raised, heart racing, praying they'd make it home. Because your like says, "I see you, I believe you, keep going," and she will keep going, even when the cameras stop rolling, even when the crowds quiet down. Because she knows the hardest battles are fought in the silence. And in that silence, she stands, still dignified, still wounded, but never, ever backing down. No one knew why Judge Vanessa Cole disappeared the day after the civil rights charges were filed against Officer Clint Radford. Not her daughter, not her colleagues, not even her longtime assistant who always knew her every move. One moment she was delivering a powerful speech at a justice reform panel in downtown Macon, and the next, her phone went dark, her chambers sat empty, and her house, usually lit by a soft glow at dusk, stood swung. The media speculated everything from breakdown to retirement, but those closest to her knew better. Vanessa wasn't the kind to run. If anything, she was the kind to walk straight into a storm if it meant protecting someone else from it. What no one knew, what no one could have guessed, was that her disappearance was part of something far greater, a mission born from the very injustice that tried to break her. Weeks earlier, before the lawsuit hearing and the public rallies, a young woman named Kalila had come to Vanessa's office in tears. Kalila was only 22. A recent law grad working at a grassroots civil rights firm in Atlanta. She had evidence, real, hard evidence, that a network of officers across multiple counties were using a fake database to stop, harass, and detain black drivers. It wasn't just racial profiling. It was an organized, off-the-books surveillance system buried under layers of secrecy and backed by powerful people. She had records, names, audio recordings, but she was scared. She didn't trust anyone in law enforcement, not even her firm. So she came to Vanessa. "You don't know me," Kalila said, voice shaking. "But I watched what happened to you, and if you stood there on that road and survived that, I know you'll understand what I'm holding." Vanessa reviewed the files, and what she found chilled her to the bone. It was bigger than Radford, bigger than one bad cop. There were judges involved, elected officials, even some prosecutors, all turning a blind eye while innocent people were targeted and sometimes disappeared into holding cells with no records, no lawyers, no phone calls. She knew she couldn't just hand this off to any agency. It would vanish before anyone ever saw it. So she made a choice. She told Kalila to leave the files with her, and then she vanished. What happened next wasn't in any newspaper, and it never made it to television, but it will live forever in the memory of those few who knew. Vanessa drove to a town no one thinks about, Lawton, Georgia, a place where bad things happen quietly and leave no trace. She parked at a diner, left her phone in the glove compartment, and met with an old friend from law school, Jamil, now working off-grid as a cybersecurity expert and whistleblower advisor. She told him everything. Together, they traced server logs, backdoor systems, and dead-drop email accounts used by officers to coordinate illegal stops. That's when the real danger started. One night, Vanessa was followed by a dark SUV after leaving a library where she'd been using an anonymous login to pull old case records. She ducked into a gas station, slipped out the back, and disappeared through the woods behind a mechanic's shop. She ended up walking 5 miles through mud and brush, finally making it to Jamil's rented cabin near the border. By the time she arrived, her heels were shredded, her gown torn from thorns, her hands trembling, not from fear, but from adrenaline. She hadn't run like that in years. But she felt alive, in a way she hadn't since the roadside stop. Because this time, she wasn't just defending herself. She was unraveling a machine. With each day, they gathered more proof. Old body cam footage that had never been submitted to court. Officer logs that didn't match timestamps. Arrest records that had names swapped or deleted. And the worst discovery, a video. One that showed an officer planting a weapon during a stop, then joking about it afterward. Vanessa watched it 3 times. The 3rd time, she didn't blink. "This is what they protect," she said. "This is what they call protocol." Jamil hesitated. "You sure you want to go public with this?" She nodded. "If I don't, then everything I've been through, everything we've been through, means nothing." The next step was dangerous. They needed to deliver everything to the U.S. Attorney's Office, but the risk of interception was high. So Vanessa volunteered to do it herself. Jamil begged her to let him go instead, but she refused. "This started with me," she said. "It ends with me." She dressed in a simple coat, took a train to D.C., and carried the encrypted drive in a hollowed-out legal textbook. It should have been simple, but someone tipped them off. At Union Station, as she stepped off the train, 2 men in plain clothes approached her. "Judge Cole," one said, flashing a badge too fast. "We need to ask you some questions." She smiled politely, nodded, and said, "Of course." Then she turned, walked briskly to the nearest exit, and vanished into the crowd. She made it to a hotel room rented under a different name. Jamil guided her remotely. She took side streets, switched elevators twice, changed her appearance using a scarf and glasses. It felt like a spy movie. But it was real. She was fighting not just for herself, but for truth. For Kalila. For every name in those sealed documents. And finally, she did it. She handed the evidence over to a Civil Rights Division officer she trusted, an old mentee from years ago, now working in Washington. The handoff was quick, quiet. And just like that, the web began to unravel. Within days, indictments were being drafted. Several officers resigned. 2 were arrested. 1 judge was placed on leave. The entire state was watching, but no one knew Vanessa was the one who triggered it all. Until she returned. 3 weeks after she disappeared, she walked into her courtroom at 9:00 a.m. sharp. No announcement, no warning, just the sound of her heels clicking down the hallway, echoing like thunder. The room stood still. Lawyers turned. Clerks gasped. Ava, waiting in the gallery, stood up, tears filling her eyes. She took her seat, adjusted her robe, and said, "Court is now in session." She didn't explain where she'd been. Not yet. But the whispers filled the air. And when the story finally broke, when the news revealed that she had helped bring down a multi-county surveillance ring using illegal data and secret arrests, the world exploded. She was no longer just the judge who stood still on the roadside. She was the woman who vanished to expose the truth. People didn't know what to say. Some called her a hero. Others called her reckless. But everyone was watching. And now you are too. If this story moved you, if Vanessa's courage left you breathless, drop a comment below. Let her know she's not alone. Press the like button to show her that you believe in truth, in justice, in unbelievable courage. Because she didn't do this for recognition. She did it because the system needed light in its darkest corners, and she became that light. So now it's your turn. Encourage her. Support her. Say something below that reminds her the world is still listening, because even heroes need to hear they're not fighting alone. Judge Vanessa Cole returned to her bench with the poise of someone who'd weathered storms no one else could see. But behind her calm eyes lived 100 secrets and 1,000 bruises the world would never fully understand. The courtroom whispered her name like a legend now, half fear, half awe. But only a few people truly knew what she had endured, what she had risked, and what she was still fighting. The roadside encounter with Officer Radford had only been the beginning. What came after was an odyssey that pulled her into the darkest corners of justice, where laws were twisted like wire and truth was buried under layers of silence, and she had to make choices that would change her forever. It began quietly, an anonymous envelope left on her desk. No return address, no note. Just a small flash drive and a single sheet of paper that read, "They lied. This goes deeper." She could have dismissed it, thrown it away, but something in her gut told her not to, so she locked the door, drew the curtains, and opened the files. What she saw made her hands tremble. A list. Hundreds of names, timestamps, and internal police codes that didn't match any public records. There were people listed as arrested who were never booked. Men and women who had vanished into holding cells and emerged days later with no charges, no lawyers, no paperwork. Some never emerged at all. She knew instantly what it was. A secret holding program buried deep in the department's unofficial operations. A program not just in Macon, but stretching across state lines, involving multiple agencies. And the worst part? Her own name was on the list, dated the night of her unlawful traffic stop. They had recorded it, marked her as hostile. If she was there, how many others had been marked as threats for doing nothing at all? Vanessa didn't sleep that night. She paced her kitchen floor in silence, coffee cold in her hand, heart pounding with the weight of it. She had the proof, but exposing it could bring everything down. Her career, her safety, her life. But doing nothing? That would haunt her forever. So once again, she made a choice. Most wouldn't. She called a number she hadn't dialed in 15 years. Lucas Brandt, a former journalist turned underground investigator, a man known for chasing truth even when it nearly killed him. He answered on the third ring. "I'm in," was all she said. What followed was a series of actions that not even her closest allies could explain. Disappearing for days at a time. Canceling hearings without warning. Showing up in Atlanta, New Orleans, even Memphis under different names, meeting with whistleblowers, tech analysts, and former officers willing to talk off the record. She wore wigs, she used burner phones. She paid in cash. Once, she climbed a fire escape in the dead of night just to reach an ex-cop who refused to be seen in public. It was dangerous, reckless, unbelievable, and it nearly killed her. One night, in a motel outside Baton Rouge, Vanessa woke to find her room door cracked open. She hadn't left it that way. Her phone was gone. Her laptop had been wiped. And on the mirror, in red marker, someone had written, "Stop digging," and she stared at it for a long time before grabbing her coat and disappearing into the night. She didn't go back for her things. She didn't sleep. She just drove, eyes darting to her rearview mirror for hours. That was the night she realized this wasn't just about misconduct anymore. This was a network, organized, protected, violent. But she didn't stop. Lucas helped her trace the funding. Grants meant for community policing being funneled into Black Ops surveillance. Equipment never logged. Body cams with missing footage. Police unions protecting officers with 5 or more misconduct claims. And over, the same pattern. Black men and women listed as threats for minor infractions, if anything at all. It wasn't incompetence. It was design. One of the hardest moments came when she discovered that a judge she had once mentored, someone she'd considered a friend, was quietly approving search warrants with no oversight, rubber stamping whatever the officers placed in front of him. She confronted him in private. His response was cold. "You think you're saving the world, Vanessa, but you're just burning your own house down." That night, she cried in her car, fists clenched on the steering wheel. She knew he was right about one thing. She was burning something. But it wasn't her house. It was the illusion that it was ever whole in the first place. Vanessa's journey took her to places she'd never imagined. A hidden server farm in rural Alabama holding terabytes of suppressed body cam footage. A tiny law office in Chicago where a blind lawyer had been compiling similar patterns for years. A Navajo reservation where tribal officers shared their own stories of vanishing evidence and federal neglect. Every stop added another piece to the puzzle. Every story sharpened her resolve. But it came at a cost. Her body wore the exhaustion. Her mind cracked from the pressure. Once, she collapsed during a public lecture at Emory University, hitting the floor mid-sentence. She woke up in a hospital, tubes in her arm, her daughter Ava at her side, tears streaming down her face. "You can't keep doing this," Ava whispered. "They'll kill you." Vanessa turned her head slowly and said, "Not if I tell the world first." And that's what she did. In a private recording studio, late one night, with Lucas behind the camera and Kalila, the young woman who started it all, watching silently, Vanessa told her story. Every detail, every document, every threat. She named names. She showed receipts. She didn't flinch. When the video went live 2 days later, it broke the internet. Millions watched as a sitting judge exposed a system designed to break people like her. Protests reignited. Journalists picked it apart. Federal investigations were launched. But Vanessa didn't stop to celebrate. She went back to court, back to the bench, back to the very place that had tried to crush her. Because that's who she was. And though her robes were heavier now, stitched with scars and soaked in history, she wore them with pride. And now, this is the story no one saw coming. A judge who didn't just speak truth to power. She walked into its lair, unarmed, and dragged the truth out, screaming. She faced betrayal, surveillance, threats, and near death. But she never quit. She never backed down. She did things most people would never believe, and she did it not for fame, not for glory, but because silence is the enemy of justice, and she refused to be silent ever again. So if this story moved you, if Judge Vanessa Cole inspired even a flicker of courage in you, drop a comment below to let her know she's not alone. Smash the like button to show the world that truth still matters, that courage is real, and that we believe in those who risk everything for what's right. Because Vanessa didn't survive just to be remembered. She survived to remind you that the real fight for justice isn't in the headlines, it's in the shadows. And she went there so the rest of us wouldn't have to. Judge Vanessa Cole had spent a lifetime believing that if she followed the rules, upheld the law, treated everyone with fairness and respect, the system would protect her too. But that belief was shattered the night flashing red and blue lights appeared in her rearview mirror on Highway 23. It was late. Quiet. She was only 2 miles from home, still wearing her silk gown from the Legal Aid Gala where she'd been honored for her years of service. But none of that mattered to the officer who approached her car. Officer Clint Radford. He didn't see a judge. He didn't see a respected black woman who had given 3 decades to justice. He saw a threat. A problem. Someone to put in place. That night, Vanessa didn't just face the sting of racism. She came face to face with a system that had been built to undermine her at every turn. He ordered her out of the car without asking for ID, without a reason. She complied, calmly stating her name, her position, her credentials, but he didn't care. He ignored her identity, dismissed her humanity. And when she dared to speak up, when she reminded him that she was a superior court judge, he told her she wasn't special. That you people always think you are. His hand never left his holster. His words never softened. And as backup arrived and the lights multiplied, so did her fear, not for her life, but for the truth. Because she realized that if this could happen to her, with cameras recording and neighbors watching, what happened to those who had no witness at all? In that moment, Vanessa stood still not out of fear, but out of strategy. She had tried every legal tool, every respectful word, every ounce of composure she had, and still she was treated like a criminal. Still, they labeled her non-compliant. And when Captain Mays arrived, only then did the nightmare begin to fade. Radford was removed, suspended, eventually fired. But the wound didn't close. Because the damage was never just about one night. It was about everything before that night, and everything after. The community rallied. People supported her. But not everyone did. The police union defended Radford. The media spun narratives. Strangers online questioned her truth. And behind her calm public appearances, Vanessa suffered in silence. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. Her daughter Ava begged her to step back, to take a break, to let someone else fight. But Vanessa couldn't. Because the truth had followed her home that night, and it refused to let her go. And then came the envelope. A plain one, no return address. Inside was a drive. And on it? Evidence. Real gut-wrenching proof that her case was part of something far bigger. A secret database used by multiple departments to profile, track, and target black drivers under the radar. Illegal arrests, disappearing records, faked justifications, and worse, lists of individuals who had vanished without explanation. It wasn't just her. It was hundreds, thousands. And suddenly, Vanessa's world became dangerous again. She couldn't take this to just anyone. If she went through official channels, it would vanish, be buried. So she did something no one saw coming. She disappeared. Left behind her bench, her robe, her title, and went underground, quietly, strategically. She reached out to old contacts, journalists, whistleblowers. She wore wigs. She drove rental cars. She used burner phones. She moved through cities in silence, collecting stories from victims, pulling hidden files, connecting dots the public was never meant to see. Her journey was risky, unbelievable, She was followed more than once. Once, she had to jump a fence to escape men in unmarked cars outside a safe house. Another time, she slept in a church basement with her documents duct-taped to her body. But she never gave up. Not when her hands bled. Not when her breath came short. Not when the fear tried to convince her that she was alone. Because she wasn't doing this for herself anymore. She was doing it for the names in those files. For every person who didn't survive their roadside stop. For every mother who never saw her child come home. And then came the moment of truth. She handed the evidence to a trusted civil rights investigator, someone who would blow it wide open. And when the story broke, the world finally saw the truth. Investigations began. Officers were arrested. Judges recused. And Vanessa? She came back. She walked into her courtroom one morning as if she had never left. But everything was different. Not in the way people looked at her, but in the power she now carried. Because she didn't just survive the system, she exposed it. Only then did the world begin to truly understand what she had endured. The humiliation, the fear, the betrayal, and the risk, the unbelievable risk, of stepping into darkness alone just to drag the truth into the light. And she didn't do it with rage. She did it with grace, with courage, with an unwavering belief that justice must be real, not just promised. Vanessa Cole's story is not just one of survival. It's one of transformation, of refusing to be silent, of standing still when the world tried to erase her, of vanishing to find the truth, and returning so others would never have to. Her scars aren't visible, but they are real. And now you know the truth. You know what she suffered. You know what she sacrificed. So if you feel anything right now, if your heart aches for what she went through, if you see yourself in her strength, drop a comment below to encourage her. Let Judge Vanessa Cole know that her fight meant something, that her journey mattered, that the world heard her. Press the like button if you believe in justice, if you believe in fighting for truth, even when it hurts, if you believe that one woman can change the world just by refusing to back down. Because Vanessa Cole didn't just face racism. She didn't just stand still on a highway shoulder. She fought a machine that was built to erase people like her. And she won. But not because she had power. Not because she wore a robe. She won because she never stopped believing that the truth still matters. And she risked everything to prove it. Judge Vanessa Cole had always believed in the power of truth. She believed in it when she stood behind the bench in her courtroom, guiding juries through the most difficult of trials. She believed in it when she took her oath, vowing to serve justice without fear or favor. And she believed in it the night she was pulled over on Highway 23, until the truth she carried, the identity she had earned, was tossed aside like it meant nothing. That night, everything changed. That night, the world reminded her that being black, even in a robe, meant you could still be reduced to a threat. Her name was Vanessa Cole, Superior Court judge for over 3 decades, but to Officer Clint Radford, she was just another woman who didn't belong. The pain of that encounter didn't come from handcuffs or shouting. It came from being unseen, unheard, dehumanized. She had shown her ID, stated her title, spoke calmly. But it didn't matter. He reached for his holster anyway, called her non-compliant, refused to verify her identity. And as backup arrived and neighbors began to record the injustice unfolding in real time, Vanessa realized something she had never wanted to admit. The very system she served, that she trusted, didn't know how to protect her. because it was never built to. In the days that followed, the media swarmed, the department scrambled, and the world weighed in. Some praised her restraint. Others said she was overreacting. And some, the most venomous of all, called her a liar, said she must have done something to provoke him. Vanessa stayed quiet, not because she didn't have words, but because the wound ran too deep. It wasn't just that one night. It was everything it unearthed. She thought back to her childhood, being told to speak proper so no one would assume she was angry, being followed in stores, watching her father get stopped by police for driving too slow while she sat in the back seat clutching her school books. All the years she told herself that if she dressed right, worked hard, climbed high enough, she'd be safe. But standing in flats on the gravel shoulder of that highway, her heels forgotten in the back seat, her voice calm and pleading, she realized that respectability was not a shield. It was a false promise. And it had just shattered. But she didn't give up. Because the truth doesn't give up. The day Radford was placed on leave, Vanessa didn't celebrate. She was too exhausted, too broken in places she couldn't explain. Her hands trembled when she signed court orders. Her voice cracked during pre-trial conferences. Ava, her daughter, stayed by her side, cooking meals, screening calls, gently asking, "Do you want to talk?" But how do you explain to your child that you were humiliated by a system you helped build? That you stood for justice and were met with cruelty? And then, the anonymous envelope arrived. Inside was something that would shake her deeper than Radford ever could. A flash drive, a few documents, and a typed note. "You're not the only one. They've been hiding this for years. I trust you to do something." What she discovered made her blood run cold. A covert system of false reports, racial targeting algorithms used in traffic stops, dozens, hundreds of names flagged as potential threats based on vague criteria like refused to comply or delayed exit from vehicle. Some of those names had never been charged. Some had disappeared. Vanessa was on that list. She stared at the screen, heart pounding, and whispered, "They're watching us, categorizing us." Her hands shook. Not from fear, from fury. Because she had spent her life defending a system that quietly labeled people like her dangerous without ever saying it out loud. Now she had proof. But proof alone wasn't enough. She needed action. So she made the hardest decision of her life. She stepped away from the bench. Not forever, but long enough to go where the evidence led. To dig deeper. To find out how far this conspiracy reached. She traveled across counties, met with whistleblowers, talked to victims who were too afraid to speak publicly. She listened to a mother who hadn't seen her son since he was picked up for questioning over a year ago. A man who was detained for 72 hours with no charges and no record of the stop. A teenager who had a gun planted in his backpack during a routine search. Each story etched itself into Vanessa's soul. The patterns were clear. The targeting wasn't random. And the silence around it wasn't accidental. It was intentional. Departments burying complaints, internal affairs shredding files, supervisors telling officers, "Just keep it quiet." Vanessa documented every lie, every cover-up, every scar. But she wasn't invincible. One night, while staying in a motel under an alias, she found her car tires slashed. A note was left under her wiper. "Stop digging, or next time it's your throat." She didn't call the police. Who would believe her? Who would protect her? Instead, she packed her things, found another city, another name, and kept going. Because the truth was worth more than her fear. Because she had already lived through being silenced, and she refused to live that way again. With the help of an independent journalist and a few honest tech analysts, Vanessa began to assemble a report so damning, so thorough, that even the state attorney's office couldn't ignore it. The findings were released in waves. First, the internal emails, then the false arrest records, then the footage, altered, edited, sometimes deleted, but still traceable. When the news broke, it sent shockwaves through the state. And at the center of it all was the woman who had once stood still on the side of the road and dared to say, "I am a judge. I am not a threat." Now they were forced to see her, forced to listen. But not everyone welcomed the truth. The police union called her a rogue activist in robes. Right-wing commentators labeled her anti-law enforcement. Former colleagues distanced themselves. One judge she once mentored told a reporter, "Vanessa's heart is in the right place, but she's letting emotion cloud her judgment." That cut deepest of all, because her emotion was her judgment. Compassion, fairness, truth. Those were not weaknesses. They were the job. Still, she pressed on. She returned to the bench with more than a robe. She returned with history, with evidence, with purpose. Her courtroom wasn't just a place for verdicts anymore. It was a place for reckoning, for accountability, for the voiceless to be heard. She changed policies. She forced departments to produce body cam footage within 48 hours. She made it mandatory to report every stop, even the ones with no charges. She introduced bias training and reviewed every old case where evidence had gone missing. And in time, things changed. Radford was terminated. His past complaints, once hidden, were made public. Several officers were indicted. A task force was created to root out systemic abuse. The threat list database was dismantled, but the most powerful shift wasn't in policies or prosecutions. It was in perception. People no longer saw Vanessa as the judge who got pulled over. They saw her as the woman who refused to be erased, who stared down racism, weaponized silence, and fought back, not with rage, but with truth. And for the first time in a long time, she felt something close to peace. One day, after a particularly emotional trial, a woman approached her in the hallway, mid-40s, tearful. She said, "You don't know me, but I was on that list too. I never told anyone until I saw you fight. Thank you for standing up." Vanessa nodded, tears in her eyes. She didn't need applause. She didn't need praise, but she needed that moment, that truth. And now, you know her story. You know what she faced. The fear, the shame, the risks, the threats, the nights she didn't sleep, the mornings she rose anyway. You know what it cost her to stand tall, to speak truth, to survive. So if Vanessa Cole's journey moved you, if her strength left a mark on your heart, drop a comment below. Let her know she's not alone. Press the like button to show the world that the truth matters, that justice can still rise from silence, that one woman's courage can awaken an entire system. Because Judge Vanessa Cole didn't just walk through fire, she came back with the light. Judge Vanessa Cole stood on the steps of the Macon Community Civic Hall, the late afternoon sun warming her shoulders, her robe billowing gently in the breeze. The same robe she'd worn in court for decades. The same robe she'd refused to take off even when the world tried to strip her of everything else. This day felt different. Not because the fight was over, it never truly was, but because for once she felt the weight of justice beginning to balance. The years of silence, the sting of racism, the humiliation of being treated like a criminal, the anonymous threats, the lonely nights filled with doubt and exhaustion. They hadn't broken her. They had built her, reforged her, transformed her from a servant of the law into a guardian of truth. And now she stood ready to speak one final time. Inside the hall, it was standing room only. People from across the state, even across the country, had come to see her. Not because she was a judge, not because she was a victim, but because she had become something far rarer. Proof that resilience could speak louder than hate. Proof that one voice, steady and unshaken, could crack a system wide open. She took the podium slowly, scanning the crowd. There were mothers holding babies. Young women with notebooks clutched to their chests. Men who had once served time, now wearing suits and pins that read, "Justice is for all." She saw her daughter Ava, front row, eyes glistening. She saw Officer Medina, standing near the back, nodding slowly, still in uniform. Vanessa took a breath. "I never planned to become a symbol," she began, her voice strong but soft. "I just wanted to do my job, to honor the law, to serve with fairness. But life has a way of testing what we believe, and what happened to me. It wasn't just a test. It was a fire meant to consume. And for a time, I thought it might." She paused. The room was silent. But here's the truth. Sometimes the worst moments of your life are the ones that prepare you for your purpose. What began on the side of Highway 23 as an act of racial profiling and public humiliation became the start of a journey I never expected. A journey through fear, resistance, and truth. A journey that forced me to stop asking if the system would change and start asking what am I willing to do to make sure it does. Heads nodded. Some clutched tissues. The young woman beside Ava wept silently. "I want to speak to those of you who have been silenced," Vanessa continued. "To those who've been told they were too angry, too loud, too ambitious, too black, too proud. Remember this. Your voice is not the problem. The problem is the world trying to erase it. And your job, our job, is to make it impossible to ignore." She told them about the illegal database, the disappearances, the whistleblowers, the fear, the nights she thought she wouldn't survive, the motel threats, the erased footage, the judge who turned his back, the friend who said, "You're burning your legacy," and how, in the middle of that chaos, it was the voice of a young law student named Kalila that reignited her courage. A girl who handed her the truth when no one else would. "We don't always choose when we're called to act," Vanessa said. "But when it comes, you'll feel it. In your chest, in your throat, in your bones. And when it does, I want you to remember. Doing the right thing will not always be safe. It won't always be popular. Sometimes it'll hurt. But if you walk away from it, if you pretend you didn't see it, that pain will be worse, because it'll follow you forever." She looked out across the crowd. "I didn't want to be a headline. I didn't want to go viral. I didn't want to become the woman who stood still on the roadside and reminded a police officer she was a judge. But I did, and because I did, others found their courage. And because they did, we now know the truth wasn't broken. It was buried." The room stood, clapping, not in bursts, but in a long, rising wave of sound. When it finally quieted, Vanessa offered her final words. "If this story has taught me anything, it's that justice doesn't start in courtrooms. It starts in hearts, in neighborhoods, in kitchens, in quiet bravery. It starts when someone says, 'That's not right,' even if they say it alone. So be that voice. Be the witness. Be the light. Because no matter how dark it gets, light always finds a way through. She stepped down from the podium, and the crowd surged forward, not to swarm her, but to thank her, to hold her hand, to say, "You reminded me why I care." That night, the footage of her speech spread faster than any news report had. And this time, it wasn't about what happened to her. It was about what she made happen for everyone else. Vanessa returned to her courtroom the next day. Quiet, composed, but changed. She sat behind the bench with a look in her eyes no one had seen before. Not fear, not anger, conviction. And for the first time, everyone in that room, not just defendants, not just attorneys, but every officer, clerk, and observer, understood that this wasn't just a judge. This was a woman who had stared down a system, refused to be erased, and walked back in with her head held high. A woman who had risked her reputation, her safety, her peace, so others could sleep without fear. So others could believe in justice again. And now, dear listener, it's your turn. If Vanessa's story moved you, if her courage lit something inside of you, click the like button to show your support. Let her know the world still believes in truth, that justice still has an audience. Drop a comment below and encourage others to speak out. Share what you took from her story. Let's build a space where silence doesn't win, where voices like Vanessa's are amplified, not ignored. And subscribe to the channel to hear more stories like hers. Real stories, powerful stories, stories that remind us all. The world doesn't change by accident. It changes when people like Vanessa Cole stand up, speak out, and never back down, even when it hurts. Because courage is contagious. And justice is always worth the fight. Always.